Hello, and welcome to Horrorific Tales. In this show, we celebrate the creations of independent authors and aspiring writers. Please like, subscribe, and share these videos to help get our friends as much exposure as possible. We would also appreciate it if you could support our artists by following them on their independent platforms and by purchasing their works. Details on how to do so will be in the show notes. Today's horrific tale is a piece submitted to us by Lucy Leitner. Come join us now as we present to you an excerpt from Outrage, Level 10. Malone double-tapped the screen of his Omnivice, turning on the flat-screen 7K TV. There had to be a suicide feed. Among all the how-to videos that played through the day, one sad or sadistic entrepreneur must have innovated an efficient suicide for people without the conventional means. Maybe suicide was the last bastion of elitism and the exclusivity of the Republic. Of course, the speaker's feed autoplayed, as it did on everyone's TV. What the man didn't offer in method, maybe he could provide in the motivation Malone needed to inspire once-in-a-lifetime creativity that would have to be spent on suicide, since there was no way he'd ever top it. On the screen, the speaker did what he did best: speak. When his words inspired millions to take up arms against the old regime, Malone had been in another stint in rehab. When he got out, all clean and clear with a new lease on life, that life was gone. The NHL was dismantled. Hockey, and football, rugby, lacrosse, boxing, martial arts, aside from the performance aspects, and any obscure recreational activity that put partakers at risk of head injury, was banned. And no one had use for an ice boxer. 78 days sober this time. With a record of drug use, drunk driving, assault, and a bizarre larceny charge that had a lot to do with the drugs. Seeing the speaker always inspired rage mixed with a somber feeling, like angrily grieving a life lost too soon. Maybe anger was what he needed to plunge the butter knife into his aorta. The only way out of this despair. Each employee should be afforded equal rights if they do equal jobs. Wait, strike that. Each employee shall be afforded equal rights if they do equal jobs. That is how it will be. We will no longer live in a country in which companies devalue those who make them thrive. We will no longer live in a country in which the people are not truly free. Rousing applause. The speaker's channel aired vintage and recent sermons on 24-hour cycles. Malone had heard this speech before, a diatribe against big business's use of temporary workers for a permanent amount of time. This was one of his early ones, a valid point with which no rational, compassionate, empathetic person could disagree. The type of speech that made him beyond reproach, that gained him unprecedented power, that enabled him to go by merely a title. It was one that the skeptics and cynics called the echo, that he was just repeating the sentiment of the people, but with better words. That last line was the point, the argument in each of the speaker's many addresses throughout his rise and reign. The people would be truly free. Isn't that what the people want? Ultimate freedom? A nation in which the citizens police themselves and the entire population is your jury? The cops in the old regime screwed themselves. The system that supported them failed. The people were better suited to make the decisions that appointees like the police had made in the past. The people were better suited to make the decisions that appointees like police had made in the past. The people voted on every trial presented at any of the houses of justice across the nation via a simple touch of a button on the Omnivice. Bulletins kept them apprised of all incidents of aggression. Their words were heard, and they were reaffirmed by their voice, the speaker. A voice that wouldn't shut up. Malone was pacing, the voice and all its false promises hijacking some surviving area of his brain that forced him to move around. For what purpose? To get out his agitation by walking? That wasn't working. Red was starting to cloud his vision. The red of the blinding rage. It was coming back. Already. He kept pacing. His place was too small for that. He didn't have many possessions to clutter the place besides the ratty sofa, a cheap DIY coffee table, and a bed in the rear corner. The only item of real value, though most of it emotional, was one of his old hockey sticks, the one he took to rehab and the only one left. He grabbed the end and swung it over his head, dislodging a panel in the drop ceiling. He'd once used a stick. Not this one, as the stick in question was supposed to be locked forever in an evidence locker of the San Jose Police Department, so its whereabouts were currently unknown, as a weapon in an on-ice brawl. Who knew the cops in a California town were such big fans of the game that they'd pressed criminal charges? Malone didn't, so he didn't bother to flush the 60 oxys and ounce of blow in his pocket when they came by to take him in. If it hadn't been for the stick incident, and probably the 8-ball before the game, he wouldn't have been reprimanded to rehab for 8 months, missed the entire revolution, and missed the chance to write with the rest of the league and fans at the last game ever. The Pens were in Philly that night. Would have been a good time. Would have been able to swing his stick at anyone and anything he wanted. And could Malone swing his stick? All these years later, he still could. He swung it like a cleanup hitter aiming for the fences, knocking down the pole lamp in the corner in the process. The bulbs didn't break, and he left them sadly illuminating the dirt particles in the carpet. He smashed the stick into the couch, which was less than satisfying. Malone flipped the stick so the blade was facing up like a scythe and jammed the butt into the Swedish coffee table. The butt of the stick hit the floor. Malone left it there, impaling the table, and collapsed on the couch, the pain already setting in. He changed the feed. The rage inspired by the speaker was clouding his thoughts. Filtered by mood? No. The algorithm doesn't recognize suicidal as evidenced by the lack of how to end it all content. By subject matter? Who doesn't have certain subjects that strengthen one's resolve to slit one's throat with a dull blade? Being beautiful? That could do. Making the mirror jealous? Wow. Such beauty that nothing else can ever compete. The impossible beauty standards Malone had once heard so much about, until they all became possible through plummeting prices on cosmetic procedures, now on a single feed. How terrible Malone felt about having the multiple breaks in his nose repaired when the insurance companies still ran healthcare. Malone clicked watch. As soon as he saw the blonde with her perfectly symmetrical face, long figure, and ideal proportions, he felt something else that was far from suicidal. Back to the filter. A day of eating. Oh yes. More on spouting monologues about mundane munching. Maybe if his luck suddenly reversed, the subject would chew on the camera. The horror. Another reason to end it all. The first subtopic on the screen was the Stone Fruitarian Cleanse. What a way to reaffirm the hopelessness of his fellow Americans. A mousy and pale young woman with thin brown hair appeared on the screen. With her frail skinny body and her bloated face, she didn't inspire the inadvertent animal urge to live and procreate that the blonde did. Off to a fine start. It's day 6 of my Stone Fruitarian Cleanse diet. If you guys haven't been following so far, I've had a pretty rough time recently. Work has been beaucoup stressful, and I've had some foods that didn't sit right. I caved. Brown rice, which you know doesn't agree with any of my microbiomes. I've had this stressful feeling of brain fog where, I couldn't focus right. Check this. I was searching desperately for my sunglasses, and they were on my head. Must be real tough for you, Malone said, twisting the stick in the table, mirroring the sensation he was feeling behind his right eyebrow. Come on, give me an idea. I want to die before this next headache. I know I've made so much progress in getting toxins out of our food supply. I mean, my parents told me about all the pesticides and preservatives they used to ingest. We have it so much better now, but there are still toxins even if they're really only toxic to us as individuals. Brown rice turns out to be toxic to me. So I'm on day 6 of eating only stone fruits. So far my energy has been up, and I haven't done anything brain foggy like the sunglass incident. I've talked to some of you in the Stone Fruitarian community and have received some great advice. Did you know the most fibrous part of the fruit is the stone? That brings me to my first meal of the day. The girl held up a handful of cherries. The first thing I do when I wake up, before I even rub a peach pit on my teeth, is swallow 10 cherry pits. She tucks the cherry into her mouth, chews and spits out the pit and the stem. Here we go. She pops the pit back into her mouth and swallows a gulp of water. Each of the 9 repetitions repulsed Malone more, and added a tinge of that deadly, he hoped, sin envy. If only he had the resolve to inflict such unpleasantries upon himself, the butter knife would have been stuck in his neck 20 minutes ago. Okay, 10 down. Already feeling that buoyancy. Now here's a special treat for all of you today. I'm going to try something new for the première fois. I know this is supposed to be a typical day of eating, but I like to try something new every day. Now, I just read about this, but did you know that there's another part of the cherry that's even more nutritious than the pit? The stem. It's packed with antioxidants and healthy fats that I need to get a well-rounded stone fruit diet. So here goes. And 10 cherry stems went into her mouth all at once. She chewed, using all her teeth. Ambitious. She alternated her left and right to up the intensity. She curled her lips, exposing the teeth dyed purple from the traditionally edible part of the fruit, and Malone lost any lingering will to live and procreate. She'd managed to break a couple of stems in smaller pieces, but judging by what was on her tongue when she stuck it out, there was still much mastication needed. She was losing patience, much like Malone. As he reached for his omnivice to change the feed, she swallowed. She started to choke, her face turning the color of the cherries. She grabbed her neck, tried to cough, but nothing came out. She waved her hands at no one around. Thousands of viewers, but an empty home. She'd have to depend on her neighbors watching her live feed, as none of the people's first responders could possibly get there in time. They should start monitoring all feeds tagged by day of eating, cleanse, and healing to prevent the increasing numbers of fatalities during self-film experiments in the name of health like this. Turns out the single leading cause of preventable death was and would always be stupidity, but it would be wrong to legislate against that. After a couple more seconds of grabbing at her neck, there was a crash and the girl dropped out of the camera's view. Maybe Malone should have re-enabled the comment to see how many viewers mocked her death and to continue to lose faith in his compatriots. He could swallow cherry stems, if he had them, which he didn't. However, the exercise had provided the bit of incentive that Malone needed. Being that it was a basement, the ceilings weren't nearly high enough for a 6'5" Malone to hang by the neck until dead. But that couldn't stop a now inspired man. If a woman could accidentally off herself with cherry stems, Malone could die by forward lean. He removed his belt and strung it around the rod in the closet. He buckled it and slipped his head through. He leaned forward, the recycled imitation leather pressing into his Adam's apple. It would be slow, and he'd listen to the silence of the dead woman's kitchen until someone showed up and mercifully turned off the camera. He wondered how many other sickos were still watching. It would take much longer to find Malone. He'd be decaying, his head likely rotted from his body and decomposing on the kitchen floor. It would be the smell that alerted the neighbors. Certainly not the missing tow truck or the no-call, no-show at the station, or the noise of the narration of day upon day of eating coming from the TV. Alone, decapitated, oozing in a pool of evacuated bowels, rotting flesh, and entrails, being devoured by maggots to a soundtrack of narcissists describing breakfast in great detail. A fitting end to one Alex Malone. These thoughts went through his head as the restricted airflow slowly caused him to lose consciousness. Fleeting, nonsensical thoughts of cherry stems, swinging fists, heads hitting ice, and a sudden instant of clarity. This is Pittsburgh. I could have jumped off a bridge. And then everything went black. Well, we hope you enjoyed our latest horrific tale. If you'd like to keep up to date, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube page. Also, follow us on our social media pages. You can also show your support for the channel by going to our merchandise store, picking up some items there. Please also take a moment to support our contributing friends who kindly lend their talents to this show. Check out the links in the description as to how you can do this. Until next time, keep it creepy, keep it horrific.